Whew.
Hi, guys. I'm a bald veteran with a beard, and as you know, that makes me an internet firearms expert. Here with me today is a queer communist named Braden Neeson, who travels around the world being nervous that foreign police follow
Guys,
him
I'm
with
a bald
machine
veteran with
guns.
a beard. As you know, that makes me an internet firearms expert.
All right, so we are now live. Anybody who wants to hop in the chat, feel free to say things. Uh, Mad Sexy Man of the Night, my biggest fan. I'm glad you're here. Hopefully, more people come in as Ghost Tactical's chat rolls up to a close, but I'm not exactly the big man on campus, so let's see what happens. Braden, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Braden. I used to shoot guns a very long time ago. I was a long range marksman ish, longest ranges I could find anyway. Shot 22s and a 308. Shotguns a little bit, though I kind of sucked with a shotgun. Uh, but yeah, I've been shooting since I was 8. Got my first rifle when I was 10. It's something that I still enjoy, even if I never really get out anymore. Something I'd like to get back into again. But beyond that, I'm also hella socialist. Uh, I take pictures of naked people for a living. That's pretty great. Uh, and I am in favor of stronger gun controls. I just want to be smart about it because I knew growing up, like a lot of the regulations were about how a gun looked and not what it was capable of. I remember when I was 10 not being able to get a thumbhole stock in California because that made something. I can't remember if the classification was actually an assault rifle or what, but thumbhole stocks were banned, which was just stupid because they're more comfortable for tiny hands. Eh, yeah, I think whatever it is that is done should be something shown to actually be effective and not just a pain in the ass. Well, nuisance.
Now, let's go ahead and get this out of the way first. So, you want to lower crime and not just remove the gun title from gun crime, which seems to be a lot of people's goal is that they just want to remove the gun part from it. They don't actually care about lowering the crime rates, like in Australia, where they just managed to take the gun out of gun murder, gun massacre, gun crime, and replace it with fire, knives, and candlesticks.
I mean, I care about not just like the number of crimes committed, but also the effectiveness of those crimes. So both those factors together. Like, uh, somebody even with like a handgun can do a lot more damage than somebody with a knife, as a general rule of thumb. Not saying there aren't exceptions, obviously, but like,
That's actually a good argument for a more common use of handguns because you are kind of a big dude, 6 foot something, 900 pounds, whatever. uh, and so if we were to throw my 5 foot mom out there and you decided to come up and mug her, the only real recourse she would have would be to use a firearm. What we like to say here is the firearm is the great equalizer. It can take a person who is naturally smaller or weaker than an aggressive party and put them on an equal footing. Is that something that you are interested in, or do you just want everybody to get what they get from the genetic lottery and call it that?
I mean, so I don't disagree with your point as presented. I more disagree with how easy it is in some states, at least, to get a handgun. So, like, using your mom as an example, I have nothing against her wanting to defend herself, but feel that if she wanted to purchase a handgun for that purpose, she should be required to undergo training in how to use it, etc. And all of like background checks, training, waiting periods, those sorts of things uh, provide a barrier to entry that like anyone who really wants one can get through. But people like who aren't going to pass a background check, for example, like criminals, felons, etc. Anyone who doesn't want a paper trail on them for owning the gun, etc. Anyone who wants to commit a crime right then, crimes of passion drop when you have waiting periods. Suicides drop when you have waiting periods. Like having those small barriers to entry that show that your mom would know how to actually use the gun in a self-defense situation, I think could make a big difference in crime. And also, like, frankly, your mom should be trained in how to use a gun if she wants to walk around with one to defend herself.
Okay, so here in California, we do have a safety check, which admittedly is a very short, quick little process, wherein whoever sells you the gun is required to make sure that you understand the safety features, how to load it, how to unload it, how to activate any manual safeties. You know, basically, a basic understanding of the firearm is required before they can release the firearm to you. I don't believe that there should be too long of a waiting period, because there are accounts of where a person went in when they felt that their life was threatened and they felt that they needed to protect themselves. And so they decided to go buy a gun. And during the waiting period, they were victimized. I do believe, and I catch a lot of flack for this in the gun community. I've been called a FUD before, which we'll get into later if you don't understand the term. I believe that the first firearm you get should have a background check, should have a mental health check, should have a waiting period. But after you have that first firearm, I don't see a reason for any of those things. You already have one gun. More guns aren't going to make you more suicidal, more deadly, anything like that. Mad Sexy Man of the Night. Yes, about 2/3 of gun homicides in the United States, or gun deaths in the United States, gun deaths. I don't like to say gun, but yes, 2/3 of the deaths related to firearms in the United States are suicides.
Which, I mean, I kind of want to lower suicide. And there's the argument, the common argument is if you want to off yourself, you'll find a way, which has some truth to it. But an important thing to consider is both a lot of suicides are not completed because the method used like takes time, and then you consider your actions and you're like, oh shit, I don't want to actually die, rush yourself to a hospital. Uh, and a lot of them are done at like a low point. Like I don't want to say necessarily crime of passion, but like it's a crime of the moment. So in
So it's
where they
you're
instituted,
down for a moment, and then suddenly you have taken a permanent solution that you can't take back, is what you're saying.
yeah, and a gun is generally effective and quick. You try to like take too many sleeping pills, you still have time to consider your actions and call 911, and then they can pump your stomach. You put a bullet in your head, that's kind of it.
Yeah, which is
Uh,
why I personally am in favor of that waiting period for the first gun. After that, I'm not going to need. If I were the kind of person who decided they needed to take their life, I wouldn't go out and buy a second gun just for that purpose. And also having more guns doesn't make me a bigger threat to anyone else. So that's why I'm in favor of those checks on the very first gun. And so I'm lucky that, Night Strike isn't in here, because he would just scream shall not be infringed at the top of his lungs.
yeah,
But
I should put a disclaimer here. Everything I'm talking about is working from the presumption that we're talking about ideal situations and we could magically craft the laws however we want. Because I understand that amendments can be changed, but also it's incredibly difficult and incredibly unlikely in the current political climate. So I'm just sort of not touching whether or not things I propose are actually feasible and more like ideal, if that is a cool place to be coming from.
dude, hey, this is my first live stream. If we want to make this a regular thing for these debates, sure. Uh, right now, yeah, we're just chatting, feeling it out, seeing how it goes. What was I even going with here? In a perfect world, we'd be able to enact the perfect laws and figure this out, and we'd be able to see what would work and what wouldn't before it went into effect. Personally, I don't think that the Second Amendment should be repealed. I know you feel it's outdated. I do not, especially with the way that we've seen militarization of the police. And you'll see a lot of stuff on Facebook, on Twitter, on a lot of social media where people are worried about the things police are doing, which, by the way, totally baffles me. Where 1 minute, in one post, somebody will say Trump is literal Hitler and the government are his Nazis. And then in their next post will say, I need the government to take all my guns away so I can't resist them. Which
Yeah,
seems a
well,
little
I
silly.
mean, I'm generally in favor of disarming police as well. Um, but I don't know. That might be a separate discussion. I don't know if you want that within this.
If it's something you feel adds to it, bring it up. But they disarm most police in the UK, and I was actually just reading an article where this man has built a giant angel out of all the knives that have been taken or confiscated from knife murderers, and this is like a freaking 30-foot tall sculpture he's built out of knives that have been used in murders in the last decade or so. People are, they're going to kill each other, and it's a sad truth of the world that as long as two people are left alive, one person is going to want somebody else dead. And so my position is, you might as well be as effective as you can against somebody who is going to harm you, and that if somebody is going to harm somebody, taking a tool out of their hand isn't going to stop them. The NFA, you and I were discussing this before the chat. The National Firearms Act made automatic weapons illegal. Automatic weapons, or it didn't make them illegal, it made them heavily regulated. Don't get on me, guys. It made them very difficult to get. That didn't stop people from killing each other with guns. It just stopped them from killing each other with automatic guns. Even if we somehow abolished all guns tomorrow, every gun on the planet disappear, poof, people would still pack pressure cookers full of ANFO and nails. People would still, hit each other with baseball bats. People still run each other with cars. And so I believe that, no matter what we do about the guns, that's still going to happen. So I might as well have the best chance against a possible aggressor that I can have. And personally, I find that my best chance comes from the barrel of a gun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think actually two issues. Uh, One is I think people look for like I'm going to say it, a magic bullet solution, like a one size fits all solution, but we're talking about a variety of different problems. Suicide is a problem, and it's going to have its own solutions. Uh, Mass shootings, mass murders are a problem that are going to have their own solutions. And then just your average run of the mill gun crime, like people murdering each other, people doing drive-bys, all that, that's its own separate issue. Uh, Accidental discharges, some idiot leaving their loaded handgun on the coffee table and the kid finds it, like stuff like that, also a separate issue. Like there's a whole variety of solutions we need to be looking at and looking at a, targeting individual issues specifically, because I don't think there is any one solution that's going to solve all of them. And like some of them may be helped. I'm not going to say solved because I don't think you can like 100% solve anything, but some of them may be greatly helped by certain restrictions on access to firearms. Some of them may not be at all.
Well, you've got the obvious one. I'm going to pick points and then we can go back to others. But the first point, which has an easy thing, is, you mentioned somebody leaving their loaded gun where a child can get it, which is actually a felony. So, we've taken steps against that. It hasn't stopped it from happening, but leaving your firearm where a child can get it is, in fact, a felony. A loaded firearm in a place where a child could hurt themselves. I'm not saying you can't take your kids to the range. Totally legal.
Yeah.
But you are held responsible if your kid grabs a hold of your gun and blows his friend away with it. Hold on a second, real quick. Stealth Hunter, I think it was, said this out there. Waiting period has been shown to decrease the rate of suicide. Mad Sexy Man of the Night, I also agree. They need more health screening on mental illness. I have a friend who works in the mental illness field. She's actually a counselor. And she liked to say to me, hey, these people don't show signs of mental illness before. And so mental illness screening won't help. And I said, if you don't think killing a bunch of innocent people is a form of mental illness, then you and I are on completely different planets here.
Well, so I know this is a thing I've heard a lot from people. So not saying that like wanting to go murder a whole bunch of people in a nightclub or a school or wherever isn't a sign of mental illness, but it's more a question of before this person has reached whatever breaking point, before they snap, is it something that would even be detectable? And also, how would you detect it? Like they would have to check themselves into a facility, like it would have to be voluntary unless what you're proposing is mandatory mental health care, which that seems like a bad plan for a lot of ways. Um, And oh god, I had another point here.
Okay, real quick while you think of it, Stealth. I'm looking at your chat right there. It says the waiting period does not stop anything. Not bashing, just saying.
Hmm? I mean, I can bring up the statistics if you want, like going off of memory. So, like, I believe Connecticut uh, issued or instituted a mandatory waiting period on guns, and they had suicides drop. Again, going by memory, so don't quote me here. I want to say it was like 17% completed suicides. So, suicide attempts that were successful and the person died dropped like 17%. A decade later, they removed that restriction and suicide rates immediately went back up. Successful suicide.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm saying, dude. I'm all in favor of the waiting period for the first gun.
Yeah. No, sorry, that was just in response to
Oh yeah,
whoever said
stealth.
that they
Yeah.
don't do anything. But
At Mad Sexy, you're mentioning that finding a gun on the streets is not easy. Clearly, you have never been to Southside Stockton. I mean, like I've been walking around downtown and I've been offered crack, meth, guns. Like somebody was like, "Hey, white boy, you want to buy a gun?" I'm like, "What? No. What? Why would I do that? Just because I look like a skinhead? Which I'm sorry, I look like a skinhead, but I'm balding now, and it's just easier to go this way." But yeah, dude, you must live in a pretty nice place there.
I really thought that was going to be because I'm not watching that chat because there's a delay, so I'm just like looking at your face while we're talking, and I really thought they were going to go with South Side of Chicago, where I lived for a few years, but
Well, no, what he's just saying is, he said, let's see, getting a gun on the streets is easy. I don't know where you're from, but where I'm at, it's not so easy. So, yeah, I guess for you, Mad Sexy Man of the Night, that's a successful deterrent. But,
yeah,
if
well,
somebody wanted to get a gun on the streets, they would just have to go to the right place. And everybody knows the right place if they're really determined.
yeah, well, there's a comedian that said like I don't know how criminals work where you're from, but some like 17-year-old kid can't just go walking around the docks screaming, "I want to buy a gun." Like you do kind of have to already be at least somewhat in that world. But beyond all that, uh, the availability of firearms on the street, if you reduce legal access to guns, if you make it harder to get them legally, then the illegal guns will also over time decrease. They're going to get seized by cops after being used in crimes. They're going to eventually break or malfunction or get lost or ditched. Uh, and they're also going to go up in price. Like black market, uh, Australia, I don't want to go like too deep into because I know there's a lot of debate either way. But one thing that can be said about Australia is a like $800 rifle you can get at Walmart will set you back nearly like 15K in Australia because the black market prices are through the roof. Like if there's less access, then I mean it's supply and demand. Like prices go up.
Well, yeah, but also, I don't think that would work in America because, I mean, we already have the tooling in place. And people here just love to build and tinker. And just in my neighborhood, I know 3 different guys who have milled an AR from an 80% lower. And we would have those sorts of operations pop up overnight, where instead of just, making meth and crack, you would have, gun shops where people would be putting together guns to sell. And, admittedly, it takes a little bit of expertise, but once you have the tooling set up, once you have the machinery, all that stuff to go, uh, they'd be able to put out guns as fast as some of the smaller factories would. And admittedly, they would be pricier, but also they would be completely untraceable and everything. The only reason, they don't do that now is it's not profitable because it's easier for some, the one member of the gang to go in and purchase all the guns with his clear background because he doesn't have a record yet and then distribute them that way.
Is there a reason you think that wouldn't be the case in countries like Australia, Japan, the UK, etc.? Like,
I honestly can't say.
Yeah.
I do. I just do know that I have seen friends of mine mill guns from blocks of aluminum and steel. I've seen it happen, and I know that people around here have done it. We already have the expertise in this country to build those guns. Once they find somebody who wants to make an AR or wants to build a 1911 or a Glock from just spare parts they have laying around, it is a possibility. I maybe before their gun bans, they didn't have that sort of thing going on in those countries, and that's why they don't get built there. But you do see people who make those garage guns, the zip guns or whatever, people who have actually made guns in prison. And I'm sure that those things float around in those countries. Uh, we probably don't hear about them a lot because we're concentrated on America a lot because, that's how we do. But the expertise is already out there here. And so it would be just a step from saying, hey, if I just put out one or two ARs a year, suddenly I don't have to work very much. And to them saying, you know what, I'm just going to do a full setup and put out black market guns. Because, yeah, honestly, I don't know. I haven't traveled the world like you. I don't know what the drug situation is in other places. But if, cops have so much trouble here finding a crack lab or a meth lab, they're going to have just as much trouble finding a machine shop putting out black market guns.
I mean, yeah. Well, I don't know a lot about the manufacture of guns. Like I've never like tried to build a gun before. I imagine it requires more space, but I get been like growing a little bit of pot or making meth. But like zip guns, for example, you brought up zip guns. Zip guns aren't particularly great unless you're like inches away from the person. Uh, and your friends that have milled guns before, are they making the actions or are they? Because like, how complicated is it to make a semi-automatic action?
Well, I had a buddy build a 1911 out of sheet steel, aluminum, and a block of aluminum and steel using nothing but a mill and a drill press. A fully functioning 1911. He actually didn't get any jams when we went out to test fire it. It ran flawlessly. So he did that with stuff he had found on the internet and a little know-how. And you could say, yeah, we could block all those sorts of videos from the internet. I
Eh.
mean, go on YouTube right now and you can see a video on how to cook meth.
I'm generally not. I'm generally not in favor of banning education of any kind. Uh, I don't like banning books or anything like that, but I just can't imagine like a effective semi-automatic or fully automatic action being particularly easy to make. Like I'm sure it's possible, but
Well, yeah, but I mean, once you've tooled up to make them, like you've got the investment castings ready to go, then it's a simple matter of pouring the steel and the aluminum into them. Like I don't know if you're familiar with High Point. That's how they make their guns. Is they have an investment casting, pour their cheap pot metal in there, and they can pop out a gun every 2-3 minutes. And it's a small shop. Their factory is smaller than the block I grew up on, and they're a full size production company. If you were just doing a little shop, I could put, if I wanted to retool my garage just to make guns, I'd be able to put out a couple a day.
dang.
It looks complicated, but again, it's once you have those investment castings in place, or once you have your laser cutter or whatever ready to go, and you know what you're doing, it's not a hard thing to do.
That's something I would want to look into more before I like felt like I had anything intelligent to say either way. But
I
I
mean,
guess the only point I'm coming back to is in countries where guns are difficult to acquire, or certain kinds of guns are difficult to acquire and thus incredibly expensive on the black market, I'm surprised that you don't see homebrew manufacturers making comparable weapons. Like they're making shitty zip guns or like fun, cool little one shot whatevers. But
yeah, but I mean, you also have to take into account the American mindset. We're a nation that was born out of telling another nation, you can't tell us what to do, and we're going to shoot you in the face over it. And so you'll see that actually in countries where technically the law of the land is that you can't have these guns, but you've got Kalashnikovs everywhere because they're so easy to make out of stamped steel. In a lot of African countries, you have those black market guns that are technically against the law, but they're everywhere, which is how you get those war-torn countries that have been going through the same civil war. And I'm not saying they're producing them all there. Obviously, they're buying from, black market arms dealers and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of it has to do with the American attitude, the can do. If I can't if I can't buy this, I'm going to figure it out. Like, I couldn't find a holster I liked, so I now have some leather curing because, I bought some hide and I have some leather curing and I'm going to make my own holster. We have a lot of guys who make their own Kydex holsters. It's just something, you're the traveler. I don't know outside, but I think it's a part of it is the American, if I can't buy it, I'm going to do it and you can't stop me attitude.
I know. If there's one thing I've learned, it's pretty much anywhere you go, people are still people. Like, there's cultural norms of some kinds, like, vary, but at the end of the day, like, I don't think there's any one country that is more creative or more hardworking or more intelligent or more criminal minded or any other factor you want to think of. I do agree that, like, the US has a very different culture around guns in general than most of the rest of the world. European friends of mine are genuinely dumbfounded why anyone would even want to own a gun. Whereas I feel like a lot of America, they're like, this seems like such an obvious answer to a lot of Americans why they would want a gun. So there might be something to be said with those attitudes. I think there's less to be said with the, like, rebelliousness angle. Like, Spain just imprisoned a good chunk of the government of Catalonia, one of the regions in Spain, because they tried to have a vote to secede from the rest of Spain and become their own country, and now they're being charged with, like, treason and rebellion, and people in the streets in Barcelona are throwing a fit over it, and it's kind of amazing to watch. But, like, they're super rebellious in nature, political graffiti everywhere, demonstrations, and you see stuff like that over a whole variety of topics all over Europe. I haven't really traveled outside of Europe in the US, so I can't speak to other regions, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember a while ago that, we, in theory, don't hold truck with that sort of thing here in America. And, we're all about our First Amendment rights and, Second Amendment to defend the first. Anyway, you see a lot of stuff that we also in America find mind-blowing, in other countries. Like a man got arrested in Canada for yelling at somebody. And, that blows my mind there. That he wasn't doing anything but yelling. And apparently that's something you can get arrested for in Canada. And I don't get it. You can't say what you want. And that's why, obviously the First Amendment is so important. And a lot of people in my camp, and including me, say, hey, the Second Amendment is important to protect the First, because it's what keeps, stepping away from the self-defense, moving on to the wording of the Second Amendment. It's important to be able to protect ourselves, not just against, your everyday thug, but also against a tyrannical government. That we should be able to, if the government goes too far, take them into account. And if we don't have the same tools that the government has, then we cannot hold them to account. Like you're saying, like the government just arrested a bunch of people for disagreeing. What do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, so that was an attitude, I'll be honest, I didn't sympathize with too much until the most recent presidential election, and then suddenly sympathized with it a lot more. But okay, so I've never been a soldier or been in, like, anything approaching real combat. You have. With the tools we have available currently and the tools the government has available currently, drones, helicopters, etc., do you think we would like it would even be a match? Like if it really came down to it and it actually happened.
Yeah, yeah, I do. Because A, you've got the fact that soldiers are people too.
Yeah.
And if you had ever asked me or any of my buddies, and anybody but I can think of one guy who maybe would have gone the other way, uh, if you had asked any of us to fire on an American citizen, that would not have happened. Second, we can tell by Vietnam, by Afghanistan, by Iraq, that a small guerrilla force can be effective against a conventional, well equipped, well trained military. Plus, there's always that home field advantage that you get when you're facing an invading army, which in that case would be an invasion by the government into wherever. They won't know the area as well as the people who live there. They couldn't tell who was and was not a combatant. Uh, so yeah, you can see those small guerrilla forces succeeding, or at least tying up a military for decades to the point that it doesn't become profitable or reasonable to continue the conflict. So yeah, I mean, they've got predator drones and uh, but we've got regular drones. And if you fly, your regular camera drone in the path of a predator, it's going to hit it and it's going to go down. And then there's little things like that. I mean, the most dangerous item that I saw in 2 years deployed in Afghanistan was not the Kalashnikov that everybody had in their home. It was not the RPG Mark 7 that we occasionally found that they like to fire at us. That wasn't very effective. It was a pressure cooker filled with anfo and nails because you could buy it anywhere. You could bury it anywhere. It wasn't a big deal for them to be, oh, now I don't have a pressure cooker. And just they would blow the heads clean off of gunners who were sitting a little too high out of their turret. And so, yeah, a guerrilla force can absolutely combat a modern military force effectively, if not necessarily, defeat them, if not have that complete victory that you look for in a conventional war, then enough that it wouldn't be worth it.
Which, yeah, I mean, guerrilla tactics are more about just increasing the cost and making it not worth the fight anymore, and or getting public support from outside your region, and thus governmental aid from other governments, etc. But at that point, once you're at like the guerrilla warfare stage, like I mean, this was something like with zero training whatsoever on my part, I put a little bit of thought into and like what I would do. I would still be with my bolt action, just picking people off from a distance and running away. Like that's how I would guerrilla warfare. Why would I wouldn't want a semi-automatic weapon or a fully automatic weapon. That just seems like a good way to churn through ammo.
Uh, okay, I don't want to get too far into this because then we're walking into like a little uncomfortable bit.
Yeah.
But as far as like ambushing a superior force, then a semi-automatic weapon would be more effective, and especially if you can disable their vehicle and then rain fire on them. Okay, we're done with this discussion. This is getting a little oath keepery, and I want to stay away from them. They're
Fair.
a bunch of weirdos. So let's move past that part and move on to any other thoughts you have on gun laws as they are.
Yeah. Oh, what were we talking about before this? Do you remember, or should I just come up with something new?
I honestly don't. If you got something, let's address any. If you've got a next point, let's move on to that.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my current stance that is ever evolving, so I'm not like saying hard firm on this, but my current stance is handguns in particular and semi-automatic rifles as well, or anything that isn't a manual action, lever action, bolt action, what have you, uh, should require not just like a background check in the waiting period, like you mentioned, but require training to own and require registration to own. I know a lot of people are scared as soon as you say registration, but like we register everything else that can kill somebody. You register your car, you register. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. Like,
I think you're running out after car there.
Yeah, but
I mean, we don't register candy bars, and they kill more people than all weapons combined. not just candy bars, but
Yeah.
diabetes, heart disease, obesity.
But yeah, like I know that there's no perfect solution to any one problem, but I feel like those are relatively minor hoops to jump through if you are a good law-abiding citizen who wants a gun for whatever, protection, target practice, hunting. Like it's not that much of a pain to go through and get one. If, however, you like crimes of passion or suicide or if you're a criminal, etc., those are the sorts of barriers to entry that would not only make it harder to get a gun in the first place, but also easier to track you down if the gun was used in a crime after.
Well, yeah, but also, the people who go through the trouble to purchase their guns legally tend not to use them in anything but crimes of passion. And so if they're going to get tracked down, they're going to be found in their home standing over somebody's bleeding corpse with a smoking gun in their hand. If you're going to go out and murder, random people or a member of a rival gang, I don't think that would matter much because they would be using unregistered guns or they'd be using a gun they stole or something. And if your gun gets stolen and you don't report it along with what it is, it's a serial number and all that, then you're kind of an idiot anyway.
Eh. I mean, I know that varies by state. Was it? I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but the previous mayor of Stockton, uh,
Silva.
yeah, didn't he a gun that he had purchased get used in a murder, and then he claimed afterwards that it had been stolen?
Yeah, he's in jail right now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, he was actually arrested for gun charges, believe it or not. Also soliciting minors and a few other things.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
I think an important thing though would be like with any of this, I think it all gets rendered useless the second it's not standardized across the entire US. It's like matter near and dear to my heart. People like to talk about the crime rate in Chicago, usually people who have never been there.
and then I remember you talking about this, and then you say you could just drive to the next state over and get whatever.
I've literally ridden my bike to Indiana and
Right.
back. Like, uh, when you can just like there aren't border checkpoints of any kind between states in the US. So if you can just drive to another state, buy whatever you want and drive back, then whatever laws you have in your own state are more or less useless. Once you apply it to the entire country, yeah, stuff can be smuggled from Canada or Mexico or by water or plane from other places, but then that becomes a lot more difficult and expensive and riskier uh, and takes time to permeate from the borders deeper into the country, etc. Like smuggling stuff is easy to do in small numbers. It's very difficult and risky to do in high numbers as a general rule. So if whatever laws you wanted, be it even if it was just background checks and waiting periods on the first gun, standardize it across the entire country. Like make that
Well,
a federal law and not leave it up to the states.
that's actually something that we can mostly agree on there because we've been trying to get concealed carry laws standardized across, or reciprocity at least, that each state has to acknowledge every other state because like with my concealed carry permit, I can't just go to like 20 other states because they don't acknowledge that my permit is a thing. So I think it would be helpful if we standardize across all the states, but then you're stepping on states' rights, which is a big issue on its own. As the Union, we are a collection of the 50 states plus Puerto Rico and some other places.
Samoa.
But then you get on a stepping on states' rights, and some people are for that, and some people are against it. Personally, I think it should be the law of the federal government, across the entire nation. You shouldn't have any restrictions on what guns you can own, and no background checks or anything after the first.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
mean,
I'm with you there. I think it should be standardized. You're not going to hear an argument from me on that part.
yeah, states' rights. This is a little bit of a tangent, so I'll just like touch on it and then we can move on. But I kind of think the U.S. is in a really weird and awkward position where we are right now. Like, either states need to be treated much more like they are separate countries with a trade agreement, or it needs to go to we are one country and these are just different regions. Having states kind of exist somewhere in the middle kind of just makes things a lot more complicated, I think.
Well, isn't that kind of how the UK is? I mean, you've got the United Kingdom, but it's made up of England, Scotland, and Ireland. I'm not entirely sure how that works, honestly. But I thought it was sort of the same system where they were all essentially states of the United Kingdom.
Uh, to be honest, I would have to look that up. I believe it functions relatively similarly to the U.S., but I also think that like the UK as a whole uh, handles a lot more at a federal level. So like the NHS, the National Health Service, is across all the countries within the United Kingdoms, uh, whereas in the U.S., healthcare is more or less by state with just some federal regulations that say you have to meet all states have to meet these requirements, but then beyond that, the states handle it themselves. Uh, which again, I think once you do that, you're causing problems. Either all the states handle it themselves, or the federal government handles it, so it's the same across the board. But once you get somewhere in the middle, things get messy. And like where I think we might disagree is I tend to think like things should be standardized at a federal government level, like a lot of more things. And I am generally less in favor of states' rights and more in favor of a strong central government. But I do truly believe it needs to go one way or the other. I'm in favor of one way, but
Well,
I'm less in favor of it being in the middle.
I am also a fan of one central government, but not strong. I believe that we should have as little government interference in our lives as possible. Uh, but yeah, I think it should all be one thing. I believe the United States should be united. And while it's a fun name, I think we should be one country with one set of laws. We can take our driver's license across state lines. We can take our cars across state lines. But, if I decide to move to, let's just say Nevada, if I decide I'm going to move to Nevada, suddenly I have to register my car. I have to pay the fees again. I eventually have to get a new license. It boggles the mind, Why can't we just, hey, yeah, sure, I live in California, but here is my United States license for this. And I
Yeah.
would like that.
Cool.
I mean, that's not a point where we're going to argue about that. Let's take a look at the chat, see if anybody wants to chime in. Sean Green says, it's funny how states all of a sudden can disobey federal for their own convenience. Yeah, dude, you're not going to get any argument from me on that. Living in California, it's kind of a bummer when they suddenly decide to go against federal level things to make my life a little bit more of a pain. Now, let's see. Mad Sexy Man of the Night says DMV is not government. It is a government funded and run institution.
I'm not
Sean,
really sure what hair they're splitting there.
they just like to bitch or
Okay.
complain. I mean, I love these guys, but man, they sure love to complain about things. Oh, okay. Mad Sexy Man of the Night. Laws on pots and guns. Actually, this is something I wanted to bring up because I know you've been in places where marijuana is legal, and I have seen you ask before who's got the hookup on jazz cabbage, and I'm sure that hypothetically, somebody who has managed to get marijuana in a place where it was illegal. And so I want to know why you think that the same laws that a hypothetical person could circumvent to get their marijuana would stop somebody from getting a gun the same way.
uh, I think it has to do with cost. Let's use weed for example, but this applies to pretty much all drugs. Most drugs are cheap when you get right down to it. Uh, like in Massachusetts, where hypothetically marijuana might be more expensive than in other states, even though it's legalized here. They haven't licensed any shops yet, so the sale is still technically illegal because it's person to person. But hypothetically, it's like $45-50 for an eighth of an ounce of weed. That's still not a lot of money, and it's a very tiny package and very easy to transport, very easy to hide. Uh, Drugs in general are easy and cheap to produce in your kitchen or your backyard. Uh, Especially like if you live out in the country, it's super easy to grow pot. But I know people growing pot in their closets, like with just a light rig to so it'll grow like grow lights. Uh, yeah, guns maybe not currently in this country because they're fairly easy to get. But if we said hypothetically, and I'm not actually proposing this, if we just did a blanket ban on all guns, no manufacture, no sale, no transfer, all guns in this country gone. How big of a crate do you need to transport like 10 M16s or 20 handguns or whatever versus
Not
a pound of
actually
pot that'll sell to how many people? Like,
well, you know, 1 second. Hold on. I'm actually gonna do a thing here. Stay here.
okay, I'm waiting. Anyway, well, Matt's gone. Drugs are great, and I'm a fan.
Okay. Behold, my double barrel shotgun, which you'd think would be very difficult to transport because it is almost 4 feet long. Now it is not.
But still, that weighs how much, roughly?
Oh, about 6 pounds, which admittedly is not as easy to transport as a little bag of weed or whatever, but it is much more durable. It is a longer lasting item, so people would pay more for it. You're not going to burn through your gang fighting shotgun the way you're going to burn through an ounce of weed in a night.
That's true. There is the like you only need to buy it once as opposed to it being a consumable item. But though you said like the cost, people pay more for that because it's a permanent item. Once it's so drugs are theoretically significantly more expensive right now than they would be otherwise because they are a black market item. You're paying for the risk and the lack of availability. You're paying a premium for those things. So that shotgun, let's say in a black market situation, and I'm totally just pulling a number out of the air here, but like $5,000 or something for a black market shotgun. How many people have that money to drop at once that would then drop that money on a shotgun?
The same kind of people who can afford to buy a lot of cocaine and then decide they want a way to defend their investment, I would think.
I mean, I don't know too many people outside of dealers buying $5,000 of cocaine in one go, but
well, yeah, that's the people who would then have the guns, is the people who could afford that. The same guys who are transferring around a kilo of coke would be the same guys who decide, you know what, I need a gun for protecting this and also taking it from other people.
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm in favor of legalizing drugs in general and then taking all the money that we spend on fighting drugs and putting a small portion of that towards rehab programs and etc. for those that actually have a problem and want to get off of them. But that's also like a separate. But yeah, so I guess then is your argument that like the people at that point that would be buying guns are those engaging in other illicit activities that they're trying to.
Well, I'm just saying, if we can't stop hypothetical arm-sleeved people, tattoo-sleeved people from going out and buying their weed whenever they want, how would we stop them from going out and buying guns? You can fit this in a backpack. You can fit a takedown carbine in a golf bag. Well, you could actually fit like a full-size carbine in a golf bag. Are we going to search everybody who has larger than just a moderately sized purse? Because honestly, we could break down the new Ruger pistol caliber carbine and put it into a messenger bag.
Yeah. Well, uh,
And you're going to be making a lot more money on the one gun than you are on the small bag that you can hide easily. So they'd be willing to take that risk, I think.
I mean, I'm not arguing that some people would. I'm just saying that, like, I feel like you would see less of that than you do with drugs because of the cost and how few of them you can transport at a time. Like, a backpack full of handguns, like, let's just say 20, 30 handguns, that's 20, 30 people. That same backpack filled with drugs, I'm selling to several hundred who are then coming back to me to buy more and coming back to me to buy more and coming back to me to buy more versus those handguns, which are presumably sold once.
Yeah. But then, you're going to have the people who want to diversify. You've got those guys who sell heroin and meth and cocaine. And so they're going to be like, hey, yeah, I could sell you these 4 or 5 different drugs. Which one is your flavor? And is your flavor a gun instead?
Yeah. But, which, yeah, like I said, you're not going to stop everyone and everything, but you can drastically reduce the numbers. Like, if you're having to produce or import illegally whatever the object is, it's going to reduce the availability and increase the cost of that object. Uh, drugs, I think, are not an exception, but I think drugs are a little bit outside of that because they are so cheap and so easy to produce locally with minimal equipment and training, with minimal space requirements. And you can produce a whole bunch and sell it to a whole bunch of people who are going to keep coming back and buying more.
Yeah. But like I said, it's a matter of tooling up. Once you get enough, or once you've invested once,
Mhm.
then it's cheap to keep building guns. Once
Yeah.
you've got your investment castings or whatever, then it's as cheap as honestly melting down soda cans, because that's where my buddy got the aluminum for his 1911. We melted down a bunch of soda cans in the backyard, and he milled that down.
What parts were aluminum? Like I can imagine like the trigger or whatever being
The
aluminum.
frame, actually.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I don't know how familiar you are with the parts, but yeah, the slide and the barrel were steel, the frame aluminum, and a few parts in the action were aluminum. Or sorry, the frame, few parts in the action, and some other sort of accoutrement were made of aluminum.
Okay.
And they're not going to outlaw aluminum and steel. Yeah, that's just ridiculous. Oh wait, are they? I know there's some people trying to do that, at least from other countries, but let's not get into that right now. All right, so we have 7 minutes left. I'm only going to run this for the hour. I don't want to wear out my welcome, and also, there's other shows that I know are coming up. So, is there anything that you want to put out? Do you want to plug anything while I've got you here in front of a fresh new audience?
Uh, shameless plug. Go to my website, hellapositivepinup.com. It's not safe for work. You will see naked people.
Oh yeah, I've seen some of his work. He's actually taken some photographs of me clothed. It was me in my car. Not that I'm against sexy photographs. He specializes in the non-conventional model, though he has plenty of people on there who would be considered conventional models. Uh, it's a very positive thing, very inclusive. If you feel like you want to get some glamour shots taken, you think you might not be within the regular definition of attractive, check out Hella Positive Pinup. He does good work. I mean, it's fantastic. It's very artsy if that's your thing. It's very sexy. If you don't let your kids go there, because it is not for children. But hey, check it out if that's something you guys have been thinking about doing, or if it's just something you're into.
Cool. Yeah. Anything
Okay,
else
let me
you
see.
want to talk about in the last 6 minutes, or what are people saying?
Oh, okay. Let's see. We've got Midnight Range, who just brought up. Okay, gun deaths may go down, but I guarantee kidnapping, rape, burglary, assault, everything else will go up. Deaths will go up just by other methods. More people are saved with guns than killed. And he is actually correct. According to the FBI's Uniform Criminal Reporting Database, 10,000 people are regularly involved in gun crime each year. Hold on, now let me see. 14,916 last year were murdered with handguns, whereas they consider a crime in progress stopped 276,000 times. So I'm going to make that point absolutely midnight. Guns save more life than they threaten, and that's my whole point. Is bad guys are going to get guns however they need to. We might as well have the guns because we're going to be responsible. We're legally law-abiding citizens. People who have the proper training, who've gone through this stuff to get a concealed carry permit, are actually less likely than police officers to commit crimes, especially violent crimes. So, yeah, there's that.
So that stat with like crimes in progress being stopped by somebody with a gun, how many of those were civilians and not either police or security guards or current or former military?
It doesn't say, but if they didn't make an arrest or end in the death or the police shooting, because they actually do have that on here, the police shooting, then it was most likely a civilian. And I personally know people who have defended their homes or their bodies. And if you're willing to look, you can find reports of that happening every day. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people a day defending their persons and property with firearms.
Okay. So I don't want to say anything one way or the other because I haven't read this article yet, but I did, like, trying to search for statistics. I did just find this article. I'm gonna put it in the chat there. Apparently I can't put links in the chat. So anyway, Scientific American, if you want to Google it.
Hold on, which chat? The YouTube?
Yeah.
Hold on, say a thing so I can make you a moderator, then you can put a link in. Oh, okay.
But yeah, so Scientific American, like I said, I haven't read this article yet. I'm definitely going to as soon as we're done talking. Says that more guns do not stop more crimes, evidence shows. And in like the highlights, they're talking about 30 studies that show guns are linked to more crimes, murders, rapes, and others. Far less research shows that guns help. I was just looking up like the statistics that were cited and found that as like the very first hit. Here is the link. There you go.
Okay.
I think that's something worth reading. Like I said, I don't want to say anything one way or another on something I haven't even read yet, but.
Okay, let's see. We got 2 minutes left. Anybody, last questions? Anything you want to ask me or Braden? 9 Mil, you are absolutely right. Skewed information is something we have to be very careful with. That's why you always need to check the sources of your news source, not just where they got their information, but where that person got their information, so on, as far as you can, unless they have evidence to back it up or they have an impartial source. FBI, CDC, World Health Organization, then absolutely take them with a grain of salt. You don't know who's paying their bills eventually down the line unless you really want to look into it.
I think it's also super important, like if you find original research, look at the methods. So many people don't read the methods section because it's generally very dense and technical, but look at how they collected that data. Like a lot of polling data, as an example, gets skewed because they call people on landlines, and who owns a landline these days other than older generations? So they get polling info for people who are a lot older, and then people are surprised at the polls when young folks actually show up and vote, because that's not what any of the polling data was indicating. A lot of research can have these problems. People either talk to 10 people and base an entire paper on that, or maybe the paper was just not even meant to say anything definitive and just to point out that more research is needed. And then you have
and then people will absolutely take that and say, oh, hey, they said this. And so, the best kind of study is a double-blind, peer-reviewed, repeated study. So that's it for us. I'm going to get off because there's other people who are going to be starting their shows in the next minute or so. So everybody, thanks for coming along. Check out Hella Positive Pinup, and I hope to see you for my next live stream. Say bye, Braden.
Bye, Braden.